Hi everybody. Okay, where we left off was we were able to add records down here to this table. And now what we want to do is allow ourselves to be able to edit a record. So we want to be able to click on this email address here and have it populate the form. So we can change the information and then save it and have it change the information on the server side. So first thing we need to do here is add a link so that when we click on this, it actually does something. So let's go ahead and go to our template, and here we are back in our editor. So the template we have is here, and here's email address. So let's go ahead and add an anchor here. And we want it to actually anchor to something. So right here what we want to do is addresses have an email, and they also have an ID. So we're going to put our address here, .id, and we need to put, this will send it to this URL. Let's see what that does. It's probably not what we want, but let's see what it does. All right, now we've got clickable links here. Let's go ahead and click on one of them. And you'll see now it went to an error page because it tried to go to this ID. That's not actually what we want. We don't want it to change the page. We just want to load that form up. So we need to put a hash in front of this like that so it doesn't change the page. So let's go ahead and add that here. So now if we refresh without this, we click on a record, and now we've got the page stayed, and now we've got the ID of the record we clicked on. So now we want to go ahead and get this called a hash change. Then you notice it changes as I click. So we want to know when that changes so we can populate this record. So let's go ahead and let's find out how we do that. So it's called window location is what this is. And I think it's window location hash and event. And we probably want to do JavaScript because there's other, like jQuery is very popular with that. So let's see. And here is MDN. And what we want is a window event listener. So let's go ahead and grab this is what we want. And we'll put it down at the bottom of our script. So window add event listener on hash change, we want a function. And it's going to take an event. And we put our function block here. And let's go ahead and console log this event and see what we're getting. All right, so now when we change the hash, if I click on one that changes it, we've got a hash change event, and we actually, looks like we get the new URL. So old and new URL is so what was there and what is here now. But I don't see the actual hash value itself unless we get it as part of the URL. So let's go ahead and do this. It's getting that as a string, so let's just go ahead and get it from the window object. So window.location.hash, I believe. Yep, let's console log that out. Okay, let's see what we get. And there's the hash right there. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to take that ID and find the record here by that ID. Now in the previous part, we were talking about how this is not the most optimal way to do this. We've got a string here, and that's fine. But the way that we're just going through it and not capturing anything, so probably what we want to do is capture the records in a way that we can get to them by their ID. So let's do this. Let's put a variable up here. Let's call it let and addresses. So this will be similar to what we have on the server side. And this is a hash in JavaScript similar to a map that we have in Java. So this will make an addresses map that similar to what we have down there on the Java side. And then what we're going to do is populate addresses with the address ID and the address. So now what we'll get is when these records load, the addresses are going to get loaded by their ID so we can look them up. So let's go ahead and see how that works. I shouldn't actually change anything here. So click, it won't change anything until we actually try to get the record and see what we get. So now when we click on this hash change, let's see if we can get that record. So we've got this window location hash. Let's go ahead and save that to a variable. Let's call it hash. And it's going to be a constant because it's not going to change. And that's the hash. All right, and let's console log the hash. And let's also now console log the address that we get. All right, don't have one yet, so let's go ahead and set a variable, and that's not going to change. And we're going to get from our addresses collection that we just added up above by the hash ID. And we're console log out address. Let's see what happens. We got undefined, and that is because our hash has a hash in front of it. We want to get rid of that. So similar to Java, we have a substring method. So let's take our hash and let's substring it, just like we learned on the Java side. And we're going to take from the first character on. So the first character is 0, right? That's the one that the hash. So we're going to take from here, position 1 to the rest of the string. Let's go ahead and call that ID. And so now if we look up by ID and no longer hash, we should now have an address. And here we go. We've got an address that has Bob. So if we click on Tom, we should now have an address that has Tom. Yep, there it is. So now we got the address. So now what we're going to do is populate our form up here. Similar to what we did here, I'm just going to take and do the reverse. So here we're actually getting the values from the elements. Now we're going to go ahead and populate them. So I'm just going to copy and paste. Let's just put it right down here. We'll get rid of all those log statements later. And let's go ahead and get rid of some of this stuff because we don't need these labels. Those labels are for the JavaScript, which we're not using, or JSON that we're not using here. So I'm just using this to get those elements. I don't want to type it again. You could type it again. All right, so now we've got an address. So now I could just set this equal to address.email. And then do the same thing with all of these. Oops, got to remember to put the equal sign. And this will be address 1. And this will be address 2. And, oh, forgot the equal sign again. Okay, and that's zip. So that should be the end of it. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to populate that form up above with these values that come in. And this should actually just work. So let's see what happens. So let's do, hey, look at that, it filled in. So now we could try and save it when we click here, and let's see what our record would do if we did hit save. Okay, it added Bob, and this is because our add template doesn't have the ID in it yet. It just added him. We wanted actually to change that. So what happened here, we hit the save button, and our save button actually works on the click and it's posting. We actually want it to do a put. So post is for create, put is for update. So we need to go back to our form submit. Where is that? Here's the save operation. Here's the data. And then here's our fetch. Notice this says post or put. So we need to make this change depending on what we're doing here. And we need to know when it's different. So what happens is a record that exists on this side, by the time it gets here, it has an address ID, right? So what we want to do, let's go ahead and add a hidden value to this form. So we can do an input, and we'll set it to type hidden. Now let's give it an ID too so we can get to it. So the ID, let's get it to equal to ID. So when we set it now, we're going to set this value in here to ID, so then we'll know if we actually have an ID set. And the only time it can actually get into the table is if it does have an ID. So, because it means it was loaded from the server. Well, unless we load it from our edit form, which is not doing it right. So we're not there yet, so we don't have to worry about it till we get there. So let's set this to address.id. So now if we send that, it's going to send our ID, but we need it to actually do it with a put. So notice it says post or put. Let's go ahead and make a method variable. And it's going to be a constant because it's not going to change within this call. And let's do ID. We need to know if there's an ID on the form. So let's go ahead and set an ID here. All right, so now if there's an ID, we can go ahead and do something with that. So let's do if data.id, and then this is called a ternary operation. So we're going to say if the data ID exists, we're going to say we want a put method. Otherwise, we want a post method. All right, so then that should give us what we want. And it's going to post the data, so let's see if it ends up being a put. All right, so we'll refresh our page, and we've got, this one has 2 records now. Let's do Tom. All right, and now if we post this with a change, let's go ahead and change this number to 1222 333 4444. All right, so if we do a save on this record, we get undefined, which we haven't changed that yet. And now we get a 405, which I think it's operation not allowed. And we have our put method, so that worked. It's sending our ID. Where's our ID? There it is right there. So now it's sending that to the server with the ID in it. So we should be able to get the put information down on the server side. So this is working kind of the way we want. We need to make this fill in when it's successful. So we're closer. Let's see. So we need to do a lookup on this to see why this is seemingly coming in here with a good address, even though the response is no good. So let's see what our, because our response definitely says 405. So let's see what's happening here. Let's see, did we get that post? We did. And do we have the 405? Yes, we do. So there's a status code 405, so we need to check that. So let's do UrlFetch status code. And let's see how we're supposed to get that. Let's do MDN. All right, response status. Let's see what that looks like. Do they have the UrlFetch example? So here's a fetch, then function response. That is different than how we're getting it. So let's see, go back to another example, this one here. Now let's find status code. Response.status. Do they have an example of how to do it? And they don't appear to. Okay. So let's see, how do we do that then? Guard, since headers can send requests, what does this do? Non-requests. So response, as you've seen above, response instances return and fetch. So if we're reading through this, response status is the value and their status text. Do we have an example here with it? And I don't see one. So keep searching. Okay, let's say how to get status. We'll look for any example right now. Let's see, maybe this one here. Lots of documentation, but you have to kind of sift through it sometimes. And it's not what I'm expecting. Here's a fetch example. So it's got a then function response. Okay, let's try that then. So we've got a then response. All right, so then let's say, I don't even know what to do here, really. Dot status, not equal to 200. Then what? I'm surprised it's actually not going into this error. Let's see. And let's add the status code to it. Just to see what it even does, because I don't really get what's going on here. All right, so let's go ahead and post a record. .405. Oh, good. It didn't actually do anything with our record, maybe because we broke it, but so we did something. Tell you what, I'm going to stop the video here, and we'll pick this up on the next one. I'll do a little bit of research, and I'll be able to explain this a little bit better. All right, see you in the next lesson, or the next part, or the next recording, which could be appended to this one. Okay, so we're back, and we were really close. What was here before was we had status not equal to 200, which was fine. So not really anything wrong with this, but it was more optimal to go ahead and put OK. More readable, actually. And then instead of console logging out, if we throw an error from here, it'll go ahead and stop doing this and throw it down to this thing, which actually just logs it out right now. And then the other thing that was missing, why it broke on the record, was that this return wasn't there. And so it just kind of stopped and didn't do anything because nothing returned. So really close to getting it right. Needed to add this here and just change that a little bit, and then needed to add the return. So now we're getting it to where we're not adding that other record. So if I go ahead and refresh here and then populate a record, make a change, and then hit save, it's getting the put 405, which is right. It's getting the error. It's printing error twice because I told it to with the label and the URL. And then it's not adding that crazy record here like we were getting before. So that's actually working and sending to our server side. So in the next part, we're going to go ahead and take this record and add it or modify it on the server side and then return it back and send it back into here. All right, so that's it for this part, and we'll see you in the next part. Thanks for watching.